Using artificial intelligence to create things is hot right now, whether we're talking about image generation programs that create photographic and painterly illustrative images, or whether we're talking about using computer-generated software code to help software developers do their jobs more efficiently. Interestingly enough, there are very similar copyright issues coming up in the photography and the software development spaces right now, and let's take a look at what that means and where I think it's going in the future. Hey there, I am Aaron, known as the Tech Photo Guy, and so a topic like this is right up my alley. Before getting into photography, I was in the software development world, and so this is something where I think I have an interesting perspective, both as a photographer, both hobbyist and professional, and as somebody who understands the technical side of software development. I've also been known to be a bit of a copyright wonk in the past. I've given talks on, legal rights and terms of service and things like that. And so let's explore how photographers and software developers are facing similar issues right now. So whether we're talking about DALL-E, Stable Diffusion, GitHub Copilot, there are similar legal questions around that. But before we dive into that, let's make sure we have an understanding of what these systems are doing and how AI and copyright are in the mix. So if we're talking about photographic image creation, there are a variety of systems out there: Midjourney, DALL-E, Stable Diffusion. These are all systems where you provide it some sort of a text input or a base photograph to work from, and it will then generate artwork for you. I've explored a few of these in the past. There's some live streams on my channel. I'll link down below. You can check out for more information. But these systems, they have machine learning models that they've trained on, thousands or millions of images, and that's where the copyright crux comes in. And from that, they will generate a new piece of artwork for you to use. If we're talking about software development, the tool in question that brings this to the forefront is GitHub Copilot, which is a tool that allows computer programmers to, type in some code, and it uses AI to try to figure out where are they going? What's the next line of code that they might want to write? And then it will, fill in and complete that section of code, again, based on its machine learning algorithms that it's trained on millions of lines of existing computer code. And so there's copyright issues. There's very similar copyright issues between the two of these. And these copyright issues are enough that companies are wary. If we look in the photography space, stock photography companies like Getty Images and Shutterstock have banned photographers from uploading AI-generated artwork to their services because the copyright issues are unresolved. And if the images have potential copyright questions with them, the stock photography company doesn't want to put itself in the middle of that and end up finding itself exposed to legal risk or legal liability for those works. So when we talk about copyright law in the United States or elsewhere, in general, the person who created a work has the ability to dictate what somebody can or can't do with that work. And if you want to do something that's, outside of the permissions they've granted, you have to get permission to do that. Photographers are super familiar with that, and that, we sell our images, we license our work, and people can't just go find a photograph that we've taken and start using it for their own purposes, just, without us being involved in some way. When it comes to computer software code, it's the same kind of situation where you can't just go wholesale take chunks of computer code and reuse it for your own purposes unless the author of that code has made it available to do so. If we look at the specifics, here involved, we're talking about the copyright for the source material used to train these AI machine learning algorithms. If we're talking about photography, we're talking about the fact that the AI image generators have gone out and scraped the internet to find millions of photographs, images, illustrations, and things like that to use to train their machine learning models, so that, when you ask it to create a painting of a boat, or if you ask it to create a photorealistic image of business people sitting in a meeting, it has some idea what that means because it has learned from lots of images of boats and lots of images of people sitting in meetings. If we're talking about computer code, this computer code is the same kind of thing where GitHub has trained its models based on source code available on the internet. Now, GitHub itself hosts a lot of computer code that people put there. It's one of the functions that GitHub serves. But just because somebody has put their code on the internet or even put their code on GitHub doesn't necessarily mean that they want it to be publicly copied or publicly available. And so keep those things in mind as we dive into the concept of fair use, which is where this all gets murky and which is really the key concept this is all based upon. So fair use is interesting in the United States in that it's not part of the copyright law. I can't go to a book of United States laws and get a clear explanation of what is fair use and what would be allowed under fair use versus what wouldn't be allowed and would be prohibited by copyright law. Fair use is a legal defense technique that you can claim or that you can point to if accused of copyright infringement or if somebody asks, hey, how is this legal? And so fair use is something that the courts have evolved over time through a variety of court rulings. They've said, these are kind of the criteria that we look at when we understand whether a copyrighted work can be copied or used or transformed for a new purpose. That concept of being transformative, of a new, unique purpose, is something that's relatively new in copyright law and court rulings in that it first showed up in a Supreme Court ruling in 1994. So relatively recent, right? Copyright was referenced in the Constitution, but this concept of a transformative fair use is only, 30 years old. And so as we look at this, let's look at the 4 criteria that are generally considered by a court in determining whether something is fair use or not. So the first criteria they're going to look at is what is the purpose of the use of the copyrighted material? Is it for educational purposes, for research? Is it critique? Maybe it's parody. Is it for news purposes? Is it being used by a nonprofit or a charity? Is that, what's really the goal behind this usage? On the other hand, is that usage maybe purely commercial in nature? Is it for profit? Is it for the gain of the person using the work? And a court is going to be more likely to find something as fair use if it has kind of a greater good purpose, if it's being used for research or for education or for a nonprofit type of use. The second criteria is, what is the use and what is the type of the work involved? Is the copyrighted work, was it something that was already published and publicly available, or was it already private? The court's going to favor the copyright holder, especially if it's something where it hasn't really been put out to the world already. And is the copyrighted work being used for something, more objective, nonfiction type purposes? Or is it being used in a very creative way where it's fictional and really shows a lot of creativity and originality, which, when we're talking about copyright, we're often talking about originality on its own. The third criteria that gets used is how much of that copyrighted work was copied and used in creating the derivative work, right? Did somebody use just a little bit of it? Did they take just a piece of a photograph? Did they sample just, one short measure of a song? Or did they take the entire piece of work and use that in some way? I think it's fairly clear when we're talking about AI image generation and when we're talking about computer code that the algorithms that were used to train the machine learning, they looked at entire pieces of work, clearly, right? They looked at entire images, they looked at entire sets of computer code. The fourth criteria on determining whether something is fair use is the impact on the original piece and its value, the business impact in a lot of ways. And so, there's a question of, is the transformative use, is the use of the copyrighted work likely to, impact the original work? Is it going to make the original work less valuable or maybe less marketable or less saleable because of the derivative work? And I think this is an interesting piece, especially when we look at the image generation side of things, because Absolutely. If someone can use an AI image generator to create their own artwork, to create their own photography, to create their own illustrations, and they do that in lieu of paying for a photographer or paying to license an image from somebody else, they clearly are impacting the the profitability or the saleability of that original piece of work. And so when it comes to fair use, there is definitely some murkiness here, but I think we can also look at a lot of these purposes and pretty clearly see it's not always that murky. That said, when we look at this situation, there is not any direct legal precedent of artificial intelligence using copyrighted works. And so there are some cases, both in the photography and the computer code world, where the use of copyrighted work has certainly been tested in court. Google has been party to a couple of these that are interesting. On the computer side of things, there was a lawsuit, Google versus Oracle, where Oracle sued Google, alleging that Google infringed by copying some code from its APIs, its application programming interfaces. But essentially, Google won that case. And it was ruled that just because their code lines and interfaces happen to look the same as Oracle's, it wasn't necessarily copyright infringement. It could be considered fair use as a transformative work. There was another lawsuit, this time involving a more artistic creation, where the Authors Guild sued Google, alleging that Google shouldn't be allowed to scan and index copyrighted written material, books, for the purposes of Google making that searchable and performing analysis on the work. And again, this is a case where Google won that lawsuit. It was ruled that that was fair use and allowed. So if we look at how this all comes together, the reality is that it's going to get settled once there's some lawsuits, because that's how this sort of thing gets settled in a court of law. And as I record this in November of 2022, there are a group of software developers that are talking about getting together and filing a lawsuit against GitHub, alleging that their code was infringed. It will be interesting to see how that plays out. If we look at the AI image generation situation, again, it's clear that copyrighted material was used to train some of these image generators. In fact, some of the early images generated by some of these algorithms would even include a copyright watermark in the generated image that clearly came through from the source material. And so again, once these lawsuits are filed, we will have to see how things play out for the defendants. One thing I can guarantee you that we're going to see is that these AI generation tools are going to include language in their terms of service to give them as much wiggle room as possible when it comes to copyright issues with the things that they generate. You will expect to see terms of service that perhaps don't allow commercial use of the resulting work, or they otherwise include clauses that, that limit the liability of the image generator or of the code generator, if copyright questions arise from the usage. Now, regardless of the legal situation, the technology can't be uninvented. It is out there. And even if it's found that a bunch of these programs are violating copyright, the reality is they're going to be replaced by more programs that source their material in different ways and get us to similar results. There'll be some hiccups along the way if that's the case, but copyright is not going to make artificial intelligence go away. Copyright is not going to make artificial intelligence for the creation of works go away without some sort of crazy, massive rewrite of how copyright works. And I don't see that happening. For better or for worse, AI creation of creative works is here. The question is how that will play out for rights holders. Are we in a momentary period of a hiccup? Or is this a bigger issue that's going to get addressed on a greater level? With all of the things going on in our world, I don't see the United States Congress, for example, taking this up as a major piece of, their legislative platform. And so this will get hashed out in the courts. As photographers, and the photographers that I talk to, I'm excited to keep playing with AI. I'm excited to incorporate it into my work. If I put my techie hat on and I look at writing code, which is still something that I do occasionally, I like the idea that AI can leverage existing work to help me become better and more efficient. I certainly agree that copyright holders should be compensated and that their work shouldn't be used outside of the ways that they want. But the question is, what really is a transformative work? Can an AI image generator, be considered to be making a true transformative work if it's based on copyrighted material? And how does it impact the fact that in a lot of cases, these AI tools are going to potentially replace somebody making a financial transaction where they give someone money to do something in a more traditional way? Stick around. If you want to see some of this AI generated stuff in action, I'll put a video right here. You can go click on and take a look at me exploring one of these a few weeks ago. And if this kind of thing is fun for you, be sure to subscribe to the channel because I'm going to be back at you again soon. Until then, take care.